Let's talk to Ben Pyle, climate researcher and writer, of course. A story on the front page of the Telegraph today suggests that not only did the office of the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, give 800,000 quid to Imperial College to compile a series of reports about climate change and about air pollution in London. It now turns out that a scientist who independently peer-reviewed a paper that they produced was actually a member of the same group that received the funding, which doesn't sound particularly ethical, apart from anything else. Ben, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. How do you?
Yeah, very well indeed. Thanks for talking to us. I mean, I was shocked enough when it turned out that they'd given all this money to Imperial College to kind of stunt up this report, which apparently said that there was 4,000 people dying every year and all of the other things that were twisted around to make the air pollution problem seem bigger than it really was. It now turns out that Gary Fuller, senior lecturer at Imperial College, was the sole reviewer of the study, and he was in the same group.
Yeah, it's a bit like checking your own homework, isn't it?
Exactly.
If you want someone to check your numbers and you've got a political agenda to drive home, no pun intended, then a Guardian journalist and someone who's written a book called The Invisible Killer, I mean, he's just a political activist, is a pretty safe pair of hands. As it happened, I at the same time, I was trying to get hold of the data in this report that Gary Fuller allegedly peer-reviewed. I don't think he spent much time on it. And I FOI'd the Mayor's office for that data, and they refused to give it to me. And that was back in February. And so it's been going on for 6 months, and now I've taken it to the independent the Information Commissioner's office, and they said a few weeks ago that under a different rule, not FOI, environmental rules, the Mayor's office have got to give me that data, but they still haven't done so. So it seems like they can get scientists for hire to rubber stamp this stuff. But if anyone from the public wants to have a look and see what the numbers are and check the Mayor's office's workings, they're not allowed to. And we've also approached the Imperial themselves, and we've asked them what's going on and how we may challenge this. And they've just told us to go away as well. So there really is there's no political debate here, and there's no scientific debate. And we've also, of course, found Gary Fuller's colleague, has been reported also in the Telegraph, as trying to shut down scientific debate. So there's something very fishy going on here, and I don't think it's called science.
Well, that's exactly right, because I see this now all the time in terms of what kind of government policy is led by, because what they've now somebody's obviously told them, here's a great idea, tell everybody that you've done a scientific study and that the scientific study has concluded that you have to do this, and then you go and do it. You know, it's like the way that they drive the whole net zero business. It's the way they drove the COVID numbers when we were in the midst of a lockdown, and they would tell us all the time that the predictions were blah, and which were very frightening, and it turned out they were nowhere near that. And of course, Sadiq Khan assumes that because we are critical of both of those modelling episodes by Imperial College and by SAGE, that we are somehow not only suspected of being, climate deniers, we're also suspected of being COVID deniers, which couldn't be further from the truth. We simply want to know why you're using what is massaged figures and data to call it science.
Yeah, I think there's a generalised misunderstanding of what science is. A lot of people seem to think that science just produces facts like a machine. Actually, the claims that the likes of the researchers of Imperial College are producing are very weak statistical studies that look for perhaps correlation between something like air pollution exposure and how long you live, and the effects are extremely weak. They have to do quite a lot of maths to sort of force these numbers out of their investigations to give to politicians. And it's very interesting that actually you've got organisations like the Environmental Research Group at Imperial and the Grantham Institute as well, another billionaire-funded research organisation at Imperial, and you get more consensus about that weak science than you probably would get in a physics laboratory. Right. So these kind of researchers, they're not actually doing science. They're doing sort of statistical analyses for policy, which is not the way we typically expect science to to be done.
Right.
We expect scientists to be politically neutral, to not be driven by ideology, and not to have those kind of agendas. So I think we need to take everyone needs to sort of look at what their expectations of science are, and whether these scientific institutions are capable of producing them, meeting those expectations. Because I think after COVID and this climate stuff and these net zero policies, we can see that there is no real basis for the confidence that we've put in these institutions.
And it's a very familiar pattern. I mean, a spokesman apparently for the Mayor's office told The Telegraph, Dr. Gary Fuller is a world-leading academic looking at air pollution who also serves as an expert advisor to the government. Any suggestion that Dr. Fuller is anything but an independent expert in his field is nonsense. Well, that may well be, but we're not suggesting that he's not an expert. We're suggesting that his data isn't necessarily what he's made it into. And we're suggesting that the science that he claims to be absolutely solid perhaps is not as solid as he would like it to be.
Yeah, well, it's hiding behind scientific authority and scientific institutions. It doesn't. Their statement of confidence in Gary Fuller counts for naught. You know, what counts is whether that science can be scrutinised and whether his findings can be replicated. And that may only be possible if you have a consensus in an institution or in a scientific discipline to do that. But if they're putting walls up, and if they're as the Mayor's office has been doing, calling people who criticise their policies and the scientific investigations Nazis, then researchers and ordinary people, perhaps with expertise, are going to be put off from taking part in that process. So the Mayor's office really is trying to use that authority to throw away, to sort of bat away criticism, but it's just not going to wash, because it's just weak science at the end of the day, and there's going to be more and more questions asked about it as more and more people suffer the consequences of this science abuse.
Yes,
people have their cars taken away and so on and so forth.
Well, it really is becoming much, much more draconian, isn't it? And you wouldn't expect something that this would be the end of it either. You know, despite the fact that they've denied they're looking into possibly charging drivers by the mile, I'm sure that will be the next thing they try and pull.
Yeah, well, all of the green policies that we have, and it's a salami slice. We've got to realise that there is a trajectory to all this. I wouldn't call it a slippery slope. I'd call it a sheer drop. Right. And if we go back, if we look at the last 20 years, there's been salami slicing. Every freedom has been eroded, and every policy gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And it's totally changed the relationship between ordinary people and local government and national government. So now there's this antagonism. So you don't feel like the local authorities are there to make sure the roads work, or the roads are clear, and it goes quite far back. I mean, 20 years ago, they were starting to reorganise the way bins were collected, and then they started turning themselves into the bin police. So that and they reduced the level of service. So we only got one collection every 2 weeks. And then they would start fining people. Yeah. So we've got to see this in the whole. All of these environmental policies are about changing the way we live, without us having necessarily given our consent to that. And make no mistake, they want everyone out of their cars, but they know they can only do it bit by bit by bit by bit. And because people still believe that they can vote for a party that's going to give them the freedoms that they want, that's going to allow them to do what they need to do. But this is, if you look at the literature, the reports that these lobbying organisations and those scientists themselves produce, they are conceiving of a world in which nobody is allowed to drive. And we've got to take that seriously, rather than just looking at the each individual salami slice policy. Yeah, absolutely right. Couldn't agree more. Great to talk to you, Ben Powell. Thank you very much indeed. Climate researcher and writer, fighting the good fight, as we are, against this ludicrous onslaught of anti-car policy. Because that's entirely what it is. You know, there are people in London who don't have cars. There are people in London who think having clean air is a great thing. Well, of course, nobody wants to have clean air changed into not clean air. But the problem is that Sadiq Khan is not making the air any cleaner. He hasn't got any evidence that the air is cleaner because of ULEZ, and he doesn't have any evidence that by charging people to drive that cleans the air, because it doesn't, does it? It's as simple as that. Coming up, Peter Cardwell's going to join us with the lowdown on what went on.